going to address some of the most common thoughts and complaints about Code Veronica that I have come across. The excuse: Resident Evil Code Veronica didn't do that well because Dreamcast itself wasn't doing that well. This shows that even some of the larger channels are parroting what the company told their employees to say. Forget the fact that a Sonic game and a Crazy Taxi game sold more copies than Code Veronica on Dreamcast. Forget the fact that Code Veronica X actually sold more copies on PlayStation 2, 1.4 million, compared to 1.14 million on the Dreamcast. Forget the fact that Resident Evil 2 sold close to 6 million copies on the PlayStation 1 alone. The reason that Code Veronica, despite having more re releases than Dead or Alive 5, digital copies included, sold only 3 million copies, less than Resident Evil 3, because of Dreamcast's initial failure, right? Wrong. The fact that Code Veronica failed shows you that Code Veronica is not a console mover like Resident Evil 2 or Resident Evil 4. I've seen people buy a console to play Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 4. Games like Metal Gear Solid, like Final Fantasy 7, like Final Fantasy X, like Tekken 3, these were all console movers. I especially remember when it comes to Metal Gear Solid and Tekken 3, people buying a console, saving up money to buy a console just to play those two games. And as number least, so a FIFA game as well, FIFA 2000. Okay. But please consider this. The reason Code Veronica was not a console mover was maybe it wasn't that good. Please consider this a possibility, people. And I have shown in my previous videos that Code Veronica had one of the best ideas, but one of the worst execution of those ideas. Code Veronica set itself up for a trilogy, not just a sequel. 3 parts, but Capcom failed spectacularly to execute this. Please consider this as well. Resident Evil 2 sold a little less than 6 million on the PlayStation 1. Resident Evil 3 sold a little less than 4 million on the PlayStation 1. Metal Gear Solid sold more than 7 million on the PlayStation 1. Both Final Fantasy 7 and Final Fantasy 8 sold around the area of 8 million on the PlayStation 1. These last 3 games I have mentioned had much better character storytelling in a variety of settings. Some of them even very, very goofy, even being up there in space. Final Fantasy VIII. Do you see how Code Veronica's narrative came about? And also, we saw a little bit of that in Survivor as well. The character storytelling focus a bit more. And let's not forget Silent Hill, which was gaining a lot of momentum in this space. And it's almost as if Konami were trolling Capcom. Capcom released Code Veronica, and Konami, as if they said, oh, wait, you're trying to tell a love story that ends in tragedy with a biohazard setting? Here is Silent Hill 2. And then Capcom released Code Veronica X and Kanzenban in 2001, an updated version of Code Veronica. And Konami said, oh, wait, you're trying to expand on this game that has a love story that ends in tragedy, but you didn't expand on the story of the main protagonist's love interest who died as part of this tragedy? Here is Silent Hill 2 Restless Dreams, an expansion that focuses on Mary. Capcom should have done the same thing with Steve. Remember, there was an Extreme Steve mode somewhere hidden in the files as a placeholder title for something? Maybe Capcom had a plan to add a Steve Burnside campaign that goes more into his story. but maybe they couldn't get a hold of Bill Houston. The notion Claire already knew where Chris was, and that's why she was on that island. Steve did not find Chris for Claire. People, please use some common sense. Thankfully, this notion is not one that is prevailing, and most of the Resident Evil fans do believe that it is Steve who found Chris for Claire, albeit inadvertently. But I did come across this notion a few times. This is not up for debate, as the cutscenes clearly shows you that Claire did not know where Chris was specifically. All Claire knew was that Chris was in Europe. And Umbrella, since they have a facility in Paris, Claire infiltrated that facility. This is established in the very first cutscene of the game.
We caught her trespassing in our Paris lab facility 10 days ago. She apparently infiltrated the complex looking for her lost brother, Chris Redfield, one of the surviving members of RPD's famous STARS teams. Don't move.
And then Steve stumbles upon this information and tells it to Claire that Chris is under surveillance by Umbrella. And what is Claire's reaction?
Well, it seems your brother is under surveillance by Umbrella.
What?
Claire acts surprised. Please, people, just think, why will she act surprised? The only answer is that Steve not only found out where Chris is, but found out that Umbrella, the organization causing all these biohazards, also knows where Chris is. Because Umbrella cannot keep an eye on him if Umbrella doesn't know his exact location. And as a result, she sends this information to Chris via Leon, letting Chris know that he is being monitored.
I've got to contact Leon and tell him to let my brother know he's being monitored.
As she correctly deduced that if Umbrella knows where Chris is, then Chris's life is in danger.
Well, that file shows the latitude and longitude of this place. Why don't you send your brother the coordinates and ask him to come help?
Thanks, I'll do that.
And only after that, as a result of a sarcastic idea given by Steve, Claire actually acts upon that sarcastic idea and sends the distress message to Chris via Leon, after warning Chris that Umbrella is keeping an eye on him. And you can see it. Claire was more concerned about Chris's safety than her rescue. If Claire knew where Chris was, why would she infiltrate an Umbrella facility, whereas she could have directly gone to him? This also tells you that after infiltrating the Paris facility, she did not get the answer she was looking for. Otherwise, she would not act surprised when she found out where Chris was. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. I bought this game a fourth time in my life. I bought this game 4 times. And this fourth time is just to capture some footage for this specific video comparing Code Veronica X and Darkside Chronicles. So I hope you guys appreciate the length I'm going to for all of my videos on this channel, especially the bigger projects. Anyways, so right here, I think we're in caution. Is she holding? Yeah, I think she's holding her arm. So we're in caution, and you can hear Steve typing. Okay, now there's a bank of monitors here that are supposed to monitor something or someone. Okay, now people keep this in mind. Okay, listen, she's monitoring. There is no mention of looking for Chris. There is no mention of monitoring Chris. Okay, it's not until you get here.
Chris Redfield.
The email to Leon has already been sent. Now you've seen the clips. You know the cutscene. Okay? Okay, Claire contacts Leon first to tell Chris he is in danger. And after that, once Steve suggests that, well, you might as well ask your brother to come help you, even as a sarcastic joke. Then she says that, oh, yeah, that's a good idea. I can do that. Yeah, thanks. I'll do that. Yeah, this is acknowledging Steve's idea because Claire didn't take it sarcastically. Claire thought Steve was being serious. Okay? No, these little things they actually add up to the narrative of the story. That even when Claire actually found Chris, this is where she found Chris. The importance was given more to Steve because this set up that something was wrong with Steve on an emotional and a psychological level. The fact that Steve found Claire or Claire found out, thanks to Steve where Chris was, this was treated, almost as a B movie story, as a B script. Okay, look, you have computers here. Okay, you have computers here. Okay, yeah, the monitors, yeah, but yeah, the computers here. Okay, yeah. Okay, you have the entire prison system, and this was late 1998. This is Umbrella's prison system. Okay, this Umbrella's prison system, and this is the only computer. This is the only computer with internet connection. Are you out of your mind? I find that very, very hard to believe. Okay. Okay. This is why in Dark Side Chronicles, Claire actually says, I'm looking for some information. Is there a computer around? And how many computers did Steve catch? Steve said there are 3. Okay. But here we only see 1, and then the other 2 must be these 2. But this is the only one with an internet connection. I find that very hard to believe, and this is why there is no mention once Claire gets out of the cell or Rodrigo opens the door. There is no mention of Chris. There is no mention of looking for your brother.
Additionally, Claire actually stops looking for Chris from this point in Code Veronica X.
The complaint. Claire was presented as a damsel in distress in Code Veronica. She already survived Resident Evil 2 on her own, so why did she need Chris to save her?
Really? This scene?
Chris! I missed you so much.
Is causing problems? An elder brother saving a younger sister is causing problems for you because the younger sister is a woman? A family member saving another family member is a problem? Have you never had brothers or sisters? If you had a sister who was a police officer, okay, and she was in trouble, will you go and tell her like, oh wait, you're a police officer, you don't need my help, you can save yourself? That is inhumane. And I am disappointed at some of the Resident Evil fans having such a pathetic outlook at the whole situation. Next, Steve saving Claire is a problem? Didn't Chris or Jill save the other in Resident Evil 1? Didn't Claire need Leon's help to save Sherry in Resident Evil 2? Didn't Jill save Carlos in Resident Evil 3 from the Nemesis? Didn't Ada and Leon help out each other in Resident Evil 4 in their battles? Didn't Chris and Sheva save each other in Resident Evil 5? And people want to bring up Revelations 2. Didn't Claire escape the island without Moira and only comes back in the good ending where a family member, Barry, goes to save another family member and Claire Redfield never even gets off the helicopter? So you see, this damsel in distress argument makes absolutely no sense.
The complaint. Claire crying over the death of Steve made her look weak and is a problem.
Really? Claire crying over the death of her love interest is a problem. Didn't Leon do the same thing in Resident Evil 2? Ada and Leon even shared a kiss before Ada supposedly died in Leon's arms. And pay attention, he was crying because the next time he talked, he was choking up a bit.
Leon, you made it.
Claire, is that you?
And correct me if I'm wrong, but someone said that in Resident Evil 6, there's a document that indicates that after Ada supposedly died, Leon actually wanted to end it all, but had to choose to live to protect Sherry and Claire, who needed his help. And we can sort of see this with his personality because after Resident Evil 2, he becomes cynical. And if you notice Claire Redfield after Code Veronica in Degeneration and Revelations 2, and actually to an extent even Death Island, even Claire is cynical compared to Code Veronica.
Never saw this coming.
So if Leon does it, it's not a problem. But if Claire does it, it's a problem because Claire is a woman. Are some Resident Evil fans sexist? And to all of those who think that babysitter Claire is better than partner Claire, I'm very sorry to say this, but this is you Resident Evil fans putting Claire in a box, restricting her to babysitting in a biohazard. If there was a mini game where you had to change the diaper of a baby in a biohazard, you'd probably get Claire to do it. And I honestly think that this is part of the reason. This putting Claire in a box is part of the reason that Code Veronica failed. We all know that Resident Evil 6 had some future follow-ups planned to expand upon the story of Jake and Sherry. But given the response Resident Evil 6 got, those plans were shelved. Most likely, the same thing happened with Code Veronica. Capcom set it up for future content, but due to some of the fan backlash, who unfortunately wanted Claire Redfield to be a Mary Sue babysitter and nothing else, those plans were most likely shelved. People, did you know that Code Veronica was actually supposed to be its own spin-off series, not just one game?
An additional notion, the CG movies are in their own universe and are mostly unrelated to the games.
It took some consideration from my part whether or not I should even dignify this with a response. Yes, everyone, I have been confronted with something this stupid. In Degeneration, there are many Resident Evil 2 references, a Resident Evil 4 reference, and at least 12 Code Veronica references. Why would these references be there if the movie were not connected to the games? Same thing in Resident Evil Vendetta and even Resident Evil Death Island, where Jill references Resident Evil 5 and Chris references Resident Evil 6. So yes, the CG movies are very much in the same universe as the games. And as a result, we see a continuation of at least the character storytelling from the games. Speaking of poor execution, the poor execution is also seen in the English mistranslations of the Japanese dialogue. For this section, please keep 4 objective facts in mind, and I have proven this with a lot of evidence in my previous videos, so I will not go into too much detail here.
1. Claire Redfield is a very good girl character who is actually shown to be believing in a higher power and even praying to it. She is not in a romantic relationship with anyone, but has several friends who are male prior to her introduction to the Resident Evil series. 2. Wesker absolutely hates Chris and has no attraction to the sister of his archenemy. 3. Steve does not flirt or try to come on to Claire on Rockford Island. 4. The death of Steve hurt Claire so badly that she never came to terms with his death in her entire life as of this recording.
Greetings. You must be the lovely Claire Redfield. Greetings. You must be the lovely Claire Redfield.
The significance. Wesker is extremely vengeful and thus would not say anything positive or flirty to the younger sister of his arch enemy.
I don't want you following me, lady. He'll only slow me down. I don't want you following me, lady. He'll only slow me down.
The significance: Steve never tries to flirt with Claire on Rockford Island. Steve is constantly condescending to her.
Alfred, you cross-dressing freak! Alfred, you cross-dressing freak!
The significance: the OG Claire Redfield does not swear, falling more in line with the good girl characterization.
And be able to see your sister again.
You freak!
Don't you touch him!
And be able to see your sister again.
You freak!
Don't you touch him!
Significance: Claire loved Steve so much that she was willing to even protect his corpse from Wesker. And she charges at Wesker, forgetting that Wesker backhanded her halfway across a courtyard and just had her captive moments ago. By the way, Wesker's response,
I'm sorry, dear heart, but my men have already taken him.
makes more sense as a response to give Steve back instead of a response to don't you touch him. There are other mistranslations as well, such as,
Here, let me help you with that. Here, let me help you with that.
where Rodrigo's response
Thanks, but I can take care of myself.
makes more sense to the Japanese dialogue instead of the English one. These mistranslations are throughout the game, but I highlighted the more significant ones that either add or take away slightly from the character storytelling. Which brings me to the biggest misconception of Code Veronica. This is so significant that I feel that it deserves its own chapter. For this part, I will mostly talk about Code Veronica X. I have seen the cutscene several times. I have purchased this game 3 times in 5 years. I am very aware of the sequence of events. And at first, even I found it strange. Some of the events and the sequence in which they were placed made no sense. For example, in both Code Veronica X and Darkside Chronicles, why would Claire send for help and then proceed to escape from that location, having called for help to arrive in that location where she was, where she sent that distress message from? Also, in Code Veronica X, why was Claire finding Chris treated so nonchalantly? She finds him in the first 5 to 10 minutes of gameplay? Usually this type of thing has a build up to it. And then when Claire and Chris finally reunite, they are separated immediately. Why isn't Capcom treating this like a big deal? Whereas in Resident Evil 2, the beginning and the end of Claire's campaigns, she mentions finding her brother, indicating that finding Chris is very important to her.
I came to find my brother Chris. I'm looking for my brother Chris. I have to find my brother.
So why didn't Capcom treat this like a big deal in Code Veronica? But now, given just over a year ago I have revisited this game, mostly relying on common sense, I finally understand. And this is the only way that the sequence of events makes sense. The primary purpose of Code Veronica was not to reunite Claire and Chris. The proof of this is the focus of Claire's playthrough, where a lot of attention has been given to the dynamic with Steve and Claire's overall character as well. I have touched on this on a video that I made over a year ago. The hidden beauty of Code Veronica and the primary, central, most important purpose of Code Veronica was to tell the female character arc backwards, where the female protagonist starts the game mentally super strong and ends the game mentally broken. The method of doing this was a love story that ended in tragedy. Remember Steve Burnside's original hairstyle? Apparently in Code Veronica X and in Kanzenban, Capcom changed his hairstyle to avoid any trouble from Leonardo DiCaprio. And what was that movie that was very famous around that time featuring Leonardo DiCaprio?
Give me your hand.
Yes, Titanic. The James Cameron version where the non-fictional sinking ship was the setting of the movie, and the fictional love story between an underage girl and a poor painter was the primary focus of the story. In Titanic, Rose was 17, and in Code Veronica, Steve was 17. No wonder this scene gets so many Titanic references. In Titanic, the Leonardo DiCaprio character kept the girl afloat while staying in the icy water himself, saving the love interest's life with his last act. In Code Veronica, the DiCaprio hairstyle character, whose hairstyle was changed later on, also saved the love interest's life with his last act. And remember, Titanic released in 1997. Think about this. Leon also had a very similar hairstyle in Resident Evil 2, which was released in 1998. But the rumor is that Capcom didn't want any trouble from DiCaprio because of Steve, a guy who was in a Resident Evil game in the year 2000, 3 years after Titanic? Now, why do you think that is? Leon was involved in a love story in Resident Evil 2, so why was Capcom apprehensive of DiCaprio's reaction because of Steve? Here's the answer. It's because of the love story that ends in tragedy, where the guy saves the girl's life with his last act before dying for her. Remember, in Resident Evil 2, Leon didn't die for Ada. And technically speaking, Steve didn't die for Claire. I mean, Monster Steve cut the tentacle and after that was standing there like an idiot before the tentacle hit Monster Steve with the finger poke of doom. So Steve was technically murdered, but to Claire, Steve did die for her.
Furthermore, look at Claire's confidence and attitude before losing Steve and after losing Steve. And pay attention to everything, including her vocal tone and her body language.
But I thought you were another one of those.
Shut up. Make one wrong move and I'll shoot.
Commander of this base.
Oh? You must be one of Umbrella's lower level officers if you're in command of a backwater base like this one.
I got your back.
Whatever. You still have plenty of ammo. You don't have to worry about holding back.
I despise Chris.
What are you gonna do to him?
We can't take off unless we raise the bridge.
Leave that to me. You stay here and make the preparations for takeoff. Hold on. I'll wait for that monster and come back.
Claire, forget about me. Run!
I've got you now.
After her. She might know where Steve is.
Let's go.
I'll keep her busy. Just go for the emergency elevator.
Chris, but...
I can take care of this. Just go.
You have to make it. Don't die on me. Chris, where are you?
You never see Claire this delicate, this fragile ever again in Resident Evil. In addition to this, what losing Steve did to Claire, this gets referenced at least 16 times in her future canonical appearances in the original timeline. As I have demonstrated before, the reunion of Claire and Chris, however, is barely referenced. I found only 3 instances between Degeneration and Revelations 2, twice in Revelations 2, including the time where Claire tells someone to tell Piers to look after Chris. And even in Revelations 2, there are more references to the Claire-Steve dynamic compared to the references to Chris. Not considering the documents and not counting Death Island, the Claire-Steve dynamic got referenced 5 times more than the Claire-Chris reunion. Hell, in Resident Evil 5, Chris never mentions Claire or Steve while fighting Wesker, or even talking about fighting Wesker.
Speaking of Wesker, I'll just mention one thing that proves without question that Wesker was not part of the main focus of Code Veronica X. CVX Wesker has no CG cut scenes. Wesker got the Resident Evil 2 Ada Wong treatment in Code Veronica X. And even worse in Code Veronica, because Wesker actually ran away from Alexia and never shows his face in the game again.
Screw you guys, I'm going home.
And speaking of not mentioning things, I think I undersold this. I heard a remark that says something like, the movies being related to the games is a strawman argument. as the movies happened a long time after Code Veronica X. To that I say, yes, the movies did happen a long time after the events of Code Veronica X. And Claire still cannot talk about Steve or even mention his name. She seems to mention almost everything else except Steve. What does this tell you? Considering all of the strange behaviors we have seen, the only justification for everything is that she never came to terms with his death. But getting back to the primary focus of CVX, please consider this. In CVX, you spend most of Claire's gameplay escaping from Rockford Island and then escaping from Antarctica, not looking for Chris. Looking for Chris is something you do, presumably, at the very beginning of the game after you meet Steve. Even there, meeting Steve came before finding Chris, indicating that Steve is somehow significant even in finding Chris. After this point, you spend most of Claire's gameplay escaping. You spend most of Chris's scenario looking for Claire. So on a story level, Claire and Chris aren't even moving towards each other. For the whole game, Chris is trying to look for Claire, and for the majority of the game, Claire is trying to escape with Steve. So, the primary purpose of Code Veronica was to mentally break Claire Redfield, using the tragic love story as the device to do so. I know why people think that it is family that is the main purpose of CVX. I'm sorry, but that is inaccurate. The purpose of Code Veronica was to tell Claire's mental story from strong to broken. The theme was family-related sorrow. Claire and Steve both had family-related loneliness, and they bonded and eventually fell in love with each other as a result of that bonding. Rodrigo has family-related trauma as he wants to see his family again.
Looks like I can meet my family again.
Alfred misses his sister so much that he literally went insane. Alfred and Alexia both hated their father. So, the theme, not purpose, but theme of the game was family-related sorrow. The setting was the biohazard, and the fact of the Claire Chris reunion, along with the revelation that Wesker was still alive, these are plot elements. Here is another example. In Metal Gear Solid, the purpose is to show that Snake, Meryl, Otacon, and even Naomi can move past living in the past and move on with their lives and start to live and love life. Snake even reveals his real name, indicating that he is now embracing the human side of him and is starting to love life.
David. My name's David.
Same with Meryl, same with Naomi, and same with Otacon, that ultra simp. The theme was heredity, both natural and artificial. The setting was espionage to stop Metal Gear. In God of War Ragnarok, the purpose is to show that everyone can change.
For the sake of our children, we must be better.
And those who refuse to change don't have too much power to change their destiny. The theme was family dedication. What a father or a mother, a parent will not do for their child. What a child will not do for a parent. What a brother will not do for his brother, so on and so forth. The setting was Norse mythology. But back to Code Veronica X. This is why finding Chris was not only taken care of at the beginning, albeit inadvertently, which adds to the tragedy that Claire couldn't save the man who found her brother. And at this point, I did not think about this until it was facilitated by engaging with another YouTuber who produces a lot of Resident Evil content. So a huge shout out to you, Will. But think about it this way. Claire could not save the person that helped her resolve her family-related sorrow. Claire is the only person who had her family-related sorrow resolved, and she couldn't save the person who made that happen. As in, she reunited and escaped with Chris at the expense of losing Steve. You don't believe me? Claire had family-related sorrow since Raccoon City.
It's over.
No. I have to find my brother.
You're right.
Steve had family-related sorrow, and he lost both his parents in a matter of no time. Hell, he even had to kill his own zombie dad to protect Claire. Steve's sorrow was not resolved. It was made worse. Rodrigo misses his dead family and was basically waiting to die. He didn't even bother trying to escape.
Everyone's gone. I may be the only other person left. Go on. Follow your sister and get off this island.
His family-related sorrow was not resolved. Alfred went insane due to family-related loneliness, and just at the moment where Alexia woke up, Alfred died. So even his family-related sorrow was unresolved. Claire is the only person who had her family-related problem resolved in this game. And how does she react to it?
Just go for the emergency elevator!
Chris, but
I can take care of this! Just go!
you have to make it. Don't die on me.
You get out of here, Claire.
But what about?
As a surviving member of STARS, I have to.
Remember your promise. Chris, where are you?
Hey, you know that I always keep my promises.
Not a single shred of genuine happiness, as if someone ripped her metaphorical heart right out of her body and left a shell of what used to be Claire Redfield. Capcom perhaps could not have screamed this any louder to the gamer that Claire perceives that her reunion with Chris came at the expense of losing Steve. This is how Claire sees it. If you disagree with this, then the onus is on you to explain, why does Claire look so mentally broken and devastated when she's escaping with Chris, whereas she looked much happier when she was escaping with Steve and even escaping with Sherry in Resident Evil 2? If you don't like it, that's a different issue. That is perhaps you expecting Claire to be very generic instead of someone who's very unique. But at least you admit this is what happened. And speaking of the Titanic reference, what was it that the woman said about Jack? What was that woman's name again?
That was a guy. That was Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Okay, Peter Griffin, you're in this industry. I'll take your word for it. Didn't Philip Hoffman say something like, I don't have a picture of the man who saved my life?
And that he saved me in every way that a person can be saved. I don't even have a picture of him.
Didn't it ever occur to anyone that by Revelations 2 and even Death Island, Claire is the only one alive who remembers what Steve looked like? So, both in-game and retroactively, Capcom is telling you the primary purpose of Code Veronica was the love story that ended in tragedy for Claire. According to the script, Claire loved Steve so much that losing him the way she did mentally broke her. For Claire, that is the main takeaway from Code Veronica. Just like, according to the script, as stupid as it sounds, Yuna fell in love with something that is not even real. And just like, according to the script, Johnny Sasaki has loved Meryl even before Meryl met Snake, and 9 years later ended up marrying Snake's leftovers.
To ensure this, Capcom added a segment of Claire's gameplay right after Claire and Chris reunite. Now do you see why? It's to give Claire that mentally breaking moment while she's alone with Steve. And when Steve dies, you never play as Claire again. So even Capcom is telling you Claire is in no mental condition to fight anymore.
This is seen in so many ways, but let us start from the beginning. And by that, I mean before you even press the start button. From what I have seen in this game's many iterations, this game has 3 different pre-title screen cutscenes.
This is Dreamcast 1.
I am Alexia Ashford.
This is the PS2 one. And this is Kanzenban, a version released for Dreamcast and GameCube. And later on, guess which version Capcom decided to remaster for the PlayStation 3 and the X360, I think, and also had a digital release on the PlayStation 4, the PS2 version. So let's take a closer look at the pre-start menu cutscene of CVX compared to the others. In the others, we see all the main characters: Claire, Chris, Steve, Wesker. In CVX, at the same time, guess who we see? Only Claire. This is Capcom screaming at you, focus on her, focus on her, focus on her! Her face is there during the title reveal compared to a black screen in the other versions.
If this wasn't enough, notice the box cover art. In my 3 times that I've purchased Code Veronica in a span of 5 years, I always got this version, which I also hear is the version for the Dreamcast box cover art. In it, we see Claire's picture is larger, indicating that she is the primary focus of the story. But there is one more version that I came across, and this is almost cartoonish on how much Capcom is screaming at you that Claire is the primary focus of the story of Code Veronica. In it, the camera zoomed in so much on Claire's face that her head doesn't even fit in the screen.
Please, please, come closer. Too close, a little too close.
Furthermore, notice the Steve love confession and the death scene. Notice how Claire retracts her hand in both versions, CV and CVX.
Claire. Claire.
The Code Veronica X version is more indicative of Claire having lost Steve forever. The Dreamcast version is more indicative of Steve having died and Claire being in shock. The Code Veronica X version has more of the tragic love story impact. Furthermore, in Code Veronica X, this is the only change to Claire's CGI cutscene. And if I'm not mistaken, apart from Chris's facial expression at the end, is the only significant change in a CGI cutscene. Capcom did this only with Claire's CGI. You know what? I'm going to claim this, as no one else on YouTube has pointed this out explicitly in a video.
Claire.
Blind man sees many things. People, this looks like damage control, as Capcom probably figured out that the Resident Evil fans, most of them, misunderstood the purpose of Code Veronica. The primary purpose being that of a love story that ended in tragedy, which mentally broke Claire Redfield. More irrefutable proof of this later on in this video. And to add to this, as if this wasn't enough, when Resident Evil Survivor 2 Code Veronica was released for the home console, the one with canonical content, and as an immediate follow-up to CVX a few months after Code Veronica X was released on the PS2, guess what is the canonical context? The canonical context is focusing on Claire's psychological state immediately after surviving the events of Code Veronica. So in this way, even Survivor 2 is telling you, play Code Veronica and focus on Claire's mental state. And to those people who think that Resident Evil Survivor 2 Code Veronica on the console is a meaningless cash grab, why did Capcom add that specific canonical context to the game? And furthermore, why did Capcom leave out Chris, Leon, and Sherry and only kept Steve in the main arcade campaign mode alongside Claire? Also, In the monologue of Claire, she calls it a nightmare after correcting herself when she called it a dream. But in the ending of Survivor 2, we see that Steve and Claire both escape the island in a Harrier alive and well. So where's the nightmare part about it? Why does Claire only have that nightmare about Steve when in reality Chris is flying the Harrier? Pause the video and try and figure out the answer if you haven't already, or if you haven't seen my previous videos, especially Resident Evil Degeneration review. If you have, you can skip a little bit ahead. Here's the answer. Survivor 2 is telling you that Claire is in denial of Steve's death. And the nightmare part is that as soon as Steve starts flying the Harrier, he stops responding. And Claire knows that dead people don't respond. So her mind is trying to come up with any other scenario where Steve is not dead. She can't fathom a reality where Steve is not alive. She even indicates in her monologue she doesn't know what's real anymore. As she says, is what I call reality real? Anyone with slightly above average knowledge of human psychology will tell you that Claire was starting to hallucinate. In other words, starting to go insane from depression. But from Capcom's perspective, people, this looks like damage control. Capcom probably knew that they messed up in their execution so much that they had to try and salvage something out of a game. For some reason, this legally blind YouTuber understands better than the lead voice actress. Needless to say, Code Veronica is the worst selling Resident Evil game amongst the mainstream games. And to further add to this, Will from Raccoon City Cinema found out that in the Japanese version of Resident Evil 1 Remake, there is some text on an item that roughly translated says, please play Code Veronica as well.
And I finally solved the mystery of the last word on the herbicide. It says, Code Veronica mo yoroshiku ne, which can be interpreted as, please buy or play Code Veronica 2.
That's subliminal messaging. Capcom were resorting to subliminal messaging to get the Resident Evil fans to play Code Veronica. Capcom, if you're going to go that route, you might as well have taken a page out of the Simpsons book and gone superliminal.
Superliminal?
I'll show you. Hey, you!
Play Code Veronica.
Yeah, all right.
And while we're on the Titanic topic, Capcom even added a dream. The Dream, featuring an alternate reality where the love interest lived just like Titanic in the form of Resident Evil Survivor 2 Code Veronica. The dream that involved the alternate reality where Steve lived. If the two-sided love story were any more obvious, Claire would change her last name to Burnside.
Can I take your name, please, love?
Dawson. Rose Dawson.